many as we can. So we got only 15 people. So I guess let's give it another few minutes. You can share, Victor, right? You can share
Yeah,
now.
now I can do anything. I feel like a god.
Well, God, for an hour.
I need to also admit people in.
You do?
Oh, that's not gonna work. Admits all.
You got your deck. See your deck.
Are you still seeing people? Because I turned off the waiting room. They should automatically come in.
I still need to admit people.
You do?
Yeah. Enable waiting room. Okay. I've disabled our waiting room.
If you disable it, what happens then? If you just disable it?
People should automatically join if you disable the waiting room.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's 8 p.m. in New York City. That's the.
There's a problem, I think. If I disable the waiting room, then it's gonna. It doesn't. Nobody's dropping in. I think that means something else. It means that nobody can join in anymore.
Really?
Yeah.
Mahbub, do you think we could debug this somehow?
I'm looking. I don't see. Okay, I found something. Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I have. Okay. So now all participants can share screen. So hopefully no one will screen bomb us. Do you want to turn the host back
Okay.
to
I'll make
things?
Gene the host again.
So I'm
let's give this a try. It'll take 1 minute to test out.
Okay. So
right. Let me
Gene,
know.
make host. Okay.
Let's see. Okay. Still can't record. Okay, hold on once again. Oh, hold on.
Yeah. So it's recording already. So you are host now and recording.
Yeah. You know what? Why don't I just then kick off? Would that be okay?
Sure. We already have some quite a few people.
So let's yeah. Let me pause for a minute. Okay. Good evening. Good evening for us here in New York City. Good part of day for everyone else, folks. Thank you for joining New York City Large Scale Scrum Meetup, the biggest and the fastest growing in the world. Thank you to all of you who are its members. I would like to give a quick intro to the special guest tonight, his morning, in fact, but my evening. His name is Viktor Grgic. He is an agile coach and software developer, also a certified LeSS trainer, which makes me very proud. I'm a part of his small community of LeSS trainers. There aren't that many of us over the globe. Viktor has 17 years of experience in delivering enterprise systems and agile adoptions. Out of those, he has 15 years spent in Netherlands, and since 2013 has been working in Hong Kong. He brings agile adoption and practices on organizational level to management and product ownership teams, as well as is focused on technical excellence. It includes software development, architecture, and operations. In the past, he has coached and trained numbers of people and organizations, large and small, in Netherlands, Germany, China, and Japan. In addition to being a LeSS trainer and coach, Viktor writes papers, blogs, and gives classes on the subject of IT architecture and Agile. And it's probably important to recognize that any LeSS trainer is also a hands-on coach who has been or is being deeply embedded with an organization adapting LeSS. With that, I'm going to pass this on to Viktor and let him run with it. My kind ask for everyone to just keep yourself on mute. And if you have any questions, please ping it in the chat room. And either myself or my friend and colleague, Mahbub, who is also helping us with the Zoom tech aspect, we will pick it up from the chat room and pose it to Viktor, and he will pace himself. Without any further ado, Viktor, on to you. Please take it away.
Good. Thank you, Gene. Thank you for having me here. I guess you just need to keep clicking invite or add people. Yeah. This talk is about customer proximity. So I've now, for the past weeks, spending my time to do this kind of talks, and this is one of them. And every time I do a different one, and to highlight one aspect of in LeSS. And so this time is about customer proximity. So basically, how close are you to the customer? And so let's first touch upon the essence of Scrum, let's put it that way. And just to be kind of a reminder what it's all about. And at least this is my favorite definition. And it's one based on also the blog post from Bas Vodden. Basically, you have a customer. Oh, it's my son. Okay. Yeah. Bye-bye. And that was the London moment, like that guy that with the BBC, and not staged. And so you have a customer which has a problem, and or multiple customers, and so this problem can be solved by developing a product or delivering a product with a product. So the team. So the group of people we call a team then can deliver an increment, can deliver a product. So what the way they do it is they engage directly with the customer to figure out first what the problem actually is and to understand the problem, and then try to deliver. And obviously they're going to fail, and so they have to assume they're going to fail miserably. And so you want to have this feedback loop to figure out why you failed. So you failed because the product is a really wrong one, or increment that you delivered is a wrong one, or the way you work actually can be done much better. That also is pretty bad. So you iterate until it becomes a bit less bad, basically. That's the essence of Scrum. So I don't know if you noticed, I didn't mention product owner or anything like that. So taking this essence and then putting it in a LeSS context, just to be reminded of the basics of what is LeSS based upon, it's you have this concept called feature teams, and the same team that we talk about in Scrum, and but explained more in the context of a large product development. So in a large organizations where you have a lots of stuff going on, multiple applications, components, etc., whatever you want to call it. So you still want to have this essence where there is a team which is able to deliver end to end for the customer. And so in order to do that, they have to have a whole product focus. So they have to see it and orient themselves and also act upon from the whole product point of view. And regardless of the size of the product. So you want those teams to reason from that whole product. And also this team still has to be customer centric despite the size of the product and amount of applications or parts of the product. And so this still want to be retained. Now, what is important to, a nice side note is there is also the term called product teams, and maybe some of you are familiar with it. And so it's coined, I don't know if it's coined by Martin Kagan, but he's the one who's promoting that term a lot, and he writes a lot about it. It's the blog post he writes are really good. It's essentially exactly saying what we talk about here in the feature teams, except for the fact that he makes a distinction as if it is two different things. But if you are reading the material from Martin Kagan, you have to realize that what I'm talking about here is essentially product teams. I just don't call them product teams. We call them feature teams. And so, but it's essentially the same thing. And this customer centricity and this view from the customer point of view goes further. Even if you have lots of teams, like in a less huge, so you have a whole bunch of teams in one area, a lot more than teams than 8. So these teams are organized in requirement area. So requirement area itself has to be customer centric, so that these groups of teams are still reasoned from the customer point of view. And we're talking about here a real end customer. We're not talking about a fake customer, such as our customer is another department or another IT department or another team within IT or anything like that. Okay, so that's not the idea. So to give in the example illustrated here is you are, let's say, in a banking, corporate investment banking. So one group of teams is going to work on onboarding in a new market, and another group of team is going to take care of the trade processing. And so both are from the customer point of view. And what in this customer proximity thing, one thing which is often mentioned and often seen is this distinction between discovery and delivery. So as a concept, there is nothing wrong with it. Obviously, there are certain activities which we can call discovery and certain activities which we can call delivery. So, so you have figuring out what exactly is the problem of the customer and exploring the market, etc., etc. And so there's all kinds of activities related to the discovery process of a product development. And then you have a delivery, so creating an increment and activities related to that. So, but we need to, but what I notice also is that there are whole frameworks even, which actually make a very hard distinction between the two. So there is assumption that you somehow have two processes. One is discovery process, another is delivery process. And so just to be clear, there is no such thing in Scrum. Scrum essentially encompasses both at the same time. So when you have a sprint and all the activities that are related to it, it starts with it's encompassing actually both fully discovery and delivery. A common misconception is that that the Scrum is all about the delivery part. So you have a team which is focusing on delivery, and then you have other people, product owner team, and all kinds of other product management, etc., which are all about discovery. And so there is some kind of even a contract in between. So once the discovery people have done their part, you kind of hand off it to the delivery people. Well, that's at least not my definition of Scrum, and it's definitely not how LeSS works. So LeSS doesn't have this distinction between discovery and delivery, and so it's not found useful. And I'll explore extensively why this is the case and why this is really important. And but the core thing about it is this proximity, so closeness to the customer. So the more you have this distinction, the more likely you're going to have a distance between the customer and the team. So to be very clear, when we talk about the collaboration between team and the customer and how this works, this is just the basics of how LeSS works and also Scrum essentially, is you have this interplay between customer, product owner, and team. And so the team engages obviously through the product owner when it comes to the product vision and a priority. So the customer users will express their need, or the need could be understood by the product owner, or potential needs, like I don't know, Apple, and trying to figure out what the customer will want in the future. And then a product owner provides this direction and this vision and a priority that comes along to the team. But then the 90% plus of the work of figuring out what exactly are we talking about here is actually up to the team. And the team engages directly with the customer users. So in order to have a maximum benefit by that, we want to continuously improve this engagement. So the team has to be as close as possible to the customer, to the users, okay? So I use interchangeably customer users because it depends enormously on the context here. So if you a product development company, then the customer, like you are creating some kind of an app for the end customer, then you want to engage with that customer, which is actually buying app or whatever it is, or the service, taking the service. But if you're in a banking, corporate investment banking, and which is then a more internal development, then the customer are the traders on a business side. So there is a business unit, and so you want to engage with those users typically. And I don't bother to make some kind of a hard distinction between these two terminologies. Okay, so to go even further, it doesn't actually matter how vague or large the question is. So even if you talk about let's say you are a bank and you want to explore some completely new way of working with the Bitcoins, and so far the Bitcoin or whatever the coin is, the banking is typically still at the starting point of figuring out what to do with that. And so you could, as a product owner, you could go to the teams and say, hey, teams, can you please figure out what to do with this Bitcoin? I don't know if it's even a useful thing for us to do. So even that question you can bring to the teams. And so it's basically a completely research question. And the research questions are very good for the teams, by the way. And it gets them really in the mode of you must engage the customer. So probably the biggest, in the reality of adopting this way of working and bringing less, one of the biggest challenges is for the teams themselves. They are simply not used to engaging customer in a certain way. So the biggest problem, the biggest difference between real engagement and no real, let's say suboptimal engagement, which is typically seen, is that the team goes to the customer users and they ask, question, what do you want? And this is way too common. So basically they're gathering whatever customer wants and they write it down, etc. And they call this a user story or whatever. And to make things worse, it's the product owner which actually does that, or fake product owner. So they write down what the customer wants. That's not what we mean by engagement. And by engagement, what we mean is that the team creeps into the head and the gamba and the situation of the customer users and try to understand as best as they can what exactly is going on the customer side point of view. So they need to put themselves in the shoes of the customer and of the users. And so this is quite opposite from what typically happens is that the IT departments or IT people complain about the customer about the business that don't understand IT. And I have exactly opposite view of that. I don't think it went way too far with the business people understanding IT. So they really don't need to understand IT. It's the IT people who need to understand the customer. That's why we're here for. And so the purpose of us IT people, let's put it that way, and the teams is to understand the problem and solve the problem of the customer. It's the job of a team in LeSS is not to deliver a technical solution. That's just a part of the task. The real job of a feature team in LeSS is to solve the customer problem. So if you can solve the customer problem, you have to really be deep into the customer domain. Okay, so hence also definition of a feature team compared to the component team. A component team is a team which is focusing on a single part of in application, let's say, etc. Is that the component team is specialized in technology typically, and so a specific programming language or one specific component and so on. And a feature team is becomes specialized from a customer domain. Okay, since typically in in large organizations, a large product development, the product can be very complex. And so it's impossible for a feature team to know the whole product and all ins and outs, details of it. Hence, they become specialized feature teams, and they become specialized in a specific part of that domain and part of that product. And so they solve that problem, and they are able to solve part of that, the whole problem of the whole product. And by this specialization or somewhat specialization, they are able to also to go very deep into the customer domain. Okay, so this is a very large difference with the component teams from a proximity point of view. The feature teams go way deeper into the customer domain than typically component teams. So what does it mean way deeper? How deep do you go? Well, you want to go to the true source of requirements, where the requirements really come from. And depending on a context, that can mean different things. And so I'm not going to go into the depth of this table. This is just a more illustration. It comes from the LeSS book. And to give you an idea about what is the exactly source of requirements depending on the context. What is maybe interesting, let me give you a specific case. It's in automated driving. So who is the customer in automated driving? So we have a LeSS adoption with automated driving. And so there's a lots of teams, it's less huge. And those teams need to figure out what a customer wants, basically. And they also need to engage the customer. But in this case, who is actually the customer of automated driving? Well, the driver, but the whole thing is not delivered yet. It's being developed. Then we realize that the drivers are also the developers themselves, commonly. And so it can be basically anybody. But then you ask a question, so what's the point of having developers being the customer? Do you really get the real information, the real requirement? Do you really get the checks and balances, whether the product is properly developed? Well, actually, the real source of requirement or a feedback loop of whether something proper is being done is probably automated. And and I see this automated driving is kind of obvious. The best way to ask the customer is actually to put a simulator, let's say, and this simulator is going to provide lots of feedback, and this simulator becomes better and better, and not only to drive around the car and when you develop an increment. And I think that the most overlooked aspect of getting the feedback and getting lots of information about the requirement is putting really from the product level measurements and then implementing those measurements and continuously observing and working with those measurements, analyzing them. And so this is job of the teams, and it's very often easy to implement an overlooked aspect of getting the real requirements, the real thing. And so does it mean, so if you say, let's understand the product, let's understand the customer really as deeply as possible and understand the problem of the customer. So is this possible? I mean, imagine you are a large organization with lots of teams, and some teams never saw the customer before. They have actually no idea what exactly is the customer domain. And so can you expect suddenly from one day to another, these teams, which we call feature teams, to understand the whole customer problem and go so deep suddenly? And while before they were just looking at a piece of technology. No, it's going to take a long time. And what happens in reality is that the LeSS adoption typically grows from a limited capability into the larger capability in time. So this is then specifically manifested in this feature team adoption map on a x-axis, and where you see that a team grows in the capability of their definition of done and their ability to deal with the whole product. So in the beginning, they might be only able to do some coding, designing, and unit testing. And at some point, they start to be able to also deal with architecture, meaning that the architects are part of the teams. And then it goes further into analysis, and so they're able to take care of a big chunk of a business analysis, and which implies that you're closer and closer to the user, to the customer. So you get deeper into that space, and until it becomes a co-creation. And so that's kind of like a perfection. And this means that you go to the customer, and regardless of the product that you're delivering, you say, customer, what is your problem? And the feature team is able to solve or deal with the problem and iterate upon that. So they are not talking about any more technology stuff. You're talking about solving these problems. And you're sitting on an equal level with the customer in order to deal with that. So that's a kind of a perfection. This takes time, a long time. So idea in LeSS is that you continuously work on improving this setup, organizational setup. And so we have this concept called perfection vision, where we continuously work on that. And as a result, you get closer and closer to customer. So this begs the question, is there some kind of a balance where you can go too far and too much? No. Simply, so I hear lots of people mentioning that, yeah, but the job of a team is to focus on delivery. They are the most productive when they are in delivery mode, and they should focus on technology stuff. Let other people do some other stuff. They're better at it. Well, that only flies if you are seeing software development as some kind of a factory work, where the purpose of a team is to deliver as many features as possible. Well, at least I don't see, and that's not how we see LeSS. The purpose of the team in LeSS is to solve the customer problem, not to deliver fast features or deliver features fast. That's not the purpose of a team. And so if you see a team as the purpose of a team to solve the customer problem as best as they can, then it's perfectly natural that you go as deep as possible into the understanding and engaging with the customer directly, because that's gonna improve the ability to solve the customer problem. So now brings me to the product owner role in LeSS, and what is the purpose of a product owner in LeSS? So obviously, you probably know that the product owner role is in Scrum, and it's a rule basically. And so, but then you must think like, what about some of you might have actually developed a product and yourself, and you did everything on your own, or you did it together with a few people. Have you ever wondered like, hey, but we must have a product owner, because without product owner, you cannot deliver the product. If I say it like that, then it's kind of obvious it's a silly question to ask, because the answer is obviously you do not need a product owner to deliver a product. And so why do we have actually product owner in Scrum or LeSS? Well, not because we like to have a product owner, but because we want to have a product vision. So the product owner is nothing else than a practical way to have a single vision and also a single priority, so that we focus on the most important all the time. And this is especially important in LeSS, in large-scale Scrum, where you have many teams, and that's what LeSS optimizes for, to deliver always the most important, and so to focus on the most important things. So if you have 50, 80 teams, whatever, you want those 80 teams to actually always focus on the most important. So somebody needs to make sure there is a single source of information or what the most important actually is. So, so why do we have a one product owner and not many product owners? Well, one of the reasons is that the fewer the roles and the fewer the people you have, no matter the description of the role, the better, the less people we're gonna be standing in between teams and the customer. And so those, what do we call it, product owner or whatever fancy roles that we have, then the epic owner or whatever, there's all kinds of fancy things nowadays. And the more likely they're gonna be standing in between customer and you. Okay, so in even with a product owner, the product owner role should be at the side. So somebody which is actually ensuring have a stronger collaboration. But if you have many product owners, that becomes rather impossible, simply because it becomes so obvious that the team becomes lazy in engaging the customer, because there are so many product owners. Those product owners are going to take care of the problem for the team. So there goes your proximity with the customer. So, it's simply a practical solution for the product vision and single priority. So that's why we have product owner role in LeSS. So be mindful of that. So we optimize for a fewer product owners. And if you think about it, what's then perfection from there? It's actually no product owner. So could you have a LeSS adoption? Would it make sense without the product owner? Yes, it's definitely possible. And yes, I've seen situations where it was almost practically achieved. So the product owner had a very minimal role. The teams were engaging so deeply with the customer that the product owner was more actually kind of like a backup. Essentially, in LeSS, the product owner role is a backup role. So in case you have a difficulty to come to a single product vision as a whole group of teams and a single priority, you need a product owner, somebody actually then who makes sure to that happens. But if you can do it without it, please do it without it. So another additional roles of a product owner is to be a connector between customer, users, and teams, and often overlooked aspect of it. And like a matchmaker, and typically product owner is more capable to get those customers on the table or get teams to go to the customer. I love especially that aspect, that teams should get out of their seats and visit the customer much more. And so that makes the job also more fun and more lively. The situation that I've seen in reality that happening, it was always productive and it was always surprising. So it takes time to get the developer convinced to go to visit the customer. And but once they did it, they always come satisfied back, and they come with the remarks such as, "Oh, you're never going to believe what I just saw. We were thinking that the product is used in such a way, but it proves to be actually very different." And so they realize how useful this is. And what does it mean when you have a offshoring? Let's say you're offshoring to India or whatever, fly them over. I mean, right now we are talking about the virus thing, it's difficult and everything, but fly them over. And so if you cannot fly them over, then have the customer connect directly through Zoom like this and with the team, so the team understands better and better what the heck is going on. So share business activities with teams. So all kinds of things like envisioning, product envisioning, etc. So it can be done together with the teams. And integrate these intermediaries. So it's not only the role of a managers to get the so-called BAs, UX people, change managers, etc. in the feature teams. It's also a role of the product owner to, by the way of collaborating, it becomes gradually obvious that those people belong in the feature teams and they shouldn't be actually being outside. Okay. And yeah, so I would say it's a question time.
Hey, Victor, did you open up the floor for Q&A or what?
Yes.
Okay,
Okay.
so I do have a question.
Yeah.
I have done the role of product owner and Scrum Master, and I have managed teams in India. So one of the disadvantages of the way we handle things was I had my daily Scrum meetings at 10:30 at night, my time, Easter time, because that was 8 o'clock in the morning with India, and was part of my deal. I don't know. I need to hear feedback. I can't see my developers talking to my salespeople, talking to the customer, and reaching out for what they need. I don't even know how would they even start approaching that. Now, maybe that's India team. So let's go back to other teams that are not in India. Still, you know, the customer still wants to do the work, and every time they're stopped by the developer, they want the end up product. So that's why they want to talk to the developer. But they have to repeat themselves. So if it's another developer, we're talking big projects, then there's a lot of interactions between one feature and another feature and the integration. They have to repeat a lot of times. I don't think they will enjoy that. So can you give me a little feedback here and how to avoid these problems?
Yeah, so let's start by the first one of offshoring, especially when you have a time zone problem. And that time zone problem is, I don't have a solution for it. So there seems to be no solution. And the only real solution is that most of what I see offshoring, especially from US to India, financially makes no sense, really, by far the most of offshoring. Simply because it costs way more money to offshore to India due to these problems. So the cost of offshoring becomes actually higher than doing it locally. And the main reason for that is because you need these additional roles in between to make it somehow work and to also fix continuous problems of misunderstandings, delays, etc., etc. And so that's the first one. So which means there is no actual solution for offshoring, except the one for most of the cases, just don't do it. And if you, for whatever reason, you want to do it, which brings me to the second part of your question, is prefer nearshoring, so much closer, because the time zone proves to be the biggest problem in offshoring. It's not really the culture and stuff. That can be also the problem, but the time zone is really killing it. And so if you have a nearshoring, then, or especially completely face-to-face, and then begs the question, how does engagement actually look like? And then with a customer, do you have a separate developers going to the customer to ask all separate questions, etc.? No, definitely not. And you're absolutely right. If you would have that, the customer will go crazy. And so they want this single reckable neck, somebody who can tell and then just go fetch and do whatever is necessary to actually make clear to developers what needs to be done. So no, you need much more effective collaborative ways of doing that. So in large-scale Scrum, the most common way, and it's kind of a standard way, is to have a multi-team product backlog refinement sessions. And so you have a specific time in 2 weeks where, depending on the subjects which are gonna be discussed or they are prioritized, the according people are invited. And so there is a big room typically where the items are physically put on a wall, so written on a paper. And so the customer or the stakeholders, they engage in a very dynamic way, and they use the time most efficiently by answering they can discuss several things, and they can also stay as long as they want, and they're gonna also stay for the specific questions to be answered, and those questions are answered not to a single individual but a group of people. And in fact, you could even, I had these engagements, you could even invite quite easily even the big shots. So for example, in a Port of Rotterdam in the Netherlands, I had a less adoption. So somewhere in the beginning of it, we had this kind of a session, and after that, every few months, another one, where the harbor master, which is a person which reports to the minister of transportation, would come and engage with the teams. And so, but this was engagement immediately with I think 40 people, and so and they could ask questions, and we have these workshops, and it was very, very efficient. And if once done in such a way, you never get a remark, I'm wasting my time. In fact, the exactly opposite. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. What about the integration between different teams of different, we're talking big scales. So now you have different features, they all have to integrate. Who's gonna organize all that integration? How is that handled?
So this integration is done by the teams themselves. So in LeSS, we don't have a coordinated roles in any specific way. So it's the teams themselves which do that. So we have different coordination techniques. And for this specific question, like let's say you have all kinds of features, but they kind of need to fit together and they need to correlate with each other, and there is something bigger going on. And so the something big has been split up into separate parts. And so one common way of dealing with that is to have one feature team being appointed as a leading team. So one feature team takes responsibility to make sure that those parts fit together. And so they engage directly with the other teams. This feature team is not some kind of a special team in a sense. They don't do development. They still do development and they still deliver the stuff. But they, in addition to their normal delivery of features, they also take responsibility of making sure that everything fits together. So,
Viktor, I have had a full-time job doing that, and I don't develop. How can somebody, you know, how can a team do it without, on top of developing?
Yes. So the amount of activities done by the team, which are complete BS, is incredible.
Okay.
And so this is something that we need to kind of be aware of, and that can be noticed only by going to the team and observing what the heck are they doing. And the problem occurs simply because it's very ironic. The problem occurs because they are actually not spending more time engaging with the customer, understanding the bigger picture. And so there is this almost disease of making teams being busy with development. And the idea behind it's ironically creating exactly opposite problem. Which is those teams should be focusing on delivery in order to be more productive. But the problem is the teams don't exist there to be productive. They exist there to solve the customer problem. So that's one part of the thing. Second is the handoff waste. So handoff waste can be massive. The fact that there is a customer and then there's somebody in between needs to understand and coordinate and figure all this out, and the team doesn't do that, it means there is a handoff. This handoff can be very huge waste. And so, for example, let's say you have a bunch of features, and so one team is focusing on one feature and another, or one part, another team is focusing on another part, and the only person who knows how those parts fit together, more or less, is the person, somebody third, okay? So it's very likely that one of those teams are going to make assumptions and mistakes about actually how to make it fit together. So you're always running late, basically, with one team delivers something and another team delivers something, and then it needs to come together and it doesn't fit. Well, the reason why it doesn't fit is because neither of the teams understood in the first place how it should fit. So just to give you an example of what I noticed. So if you have teams directly more involved in integrating things and seeing things from a whole product focus, the amount of waste drops dramatically. So which means that the amount of work required to make things fit also drops a lot. There's also in the coordination, we have two factors which play a very strong role. One is both are related actually to the cost of coordination. So there's a thing, cost of coordination. So unless we love that people coordinate and they depend on each other, this is actually great. But the cost difference can be huge, and this cost is depending on two things. One is the level of interaction. So the more direct communication is between people, the less cost you have of coordinating. And the second one is the asynchronicity. So the more synchronous coordination is, the less cost you have. So you really want to avoid asynchronous coordination. Because asynchronous means there is a delay. And a delay means that things become automatically exponentially more complicated to then resolve. So most preferred way, to put it bluntly, to put it simply, for coordinate is I, as a developer, wonder how this is going to fit with something else, or I need to connect to something else. So I stand up, I walk over, or I open up a Zoom, and I talk to another developer, and we say, let's make this fit together. But as soon as you have a third person, that third person is busy with something else. So what you're going to do is you automatically make it asynchronous. You send an email because you don't want to disturb the other person, et cetera, et cetera. So, but disturbing another team is no problem because both teams have actually same objective. So they were busy making thing happen anyway.
Yeah, Victor, this is Gina. I know. There's one question I want to make sure we don't miss. It's in the chat room.
Yeah.
Pick it up.
I wanted to say thank you. Great answer. Thanks. I appreciate it.
We can
Thank
come
you.
back to Elizabeth once again. There was one question about BAs. However, I have cascading windows and I'm getting lost a little.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh, beard. Sorry.
Yeah, what's your take on no BA or BA being an indication that they are waterfalling sprints? Short and to the point. There's one more coming. Can you take this one about BAs?
Can you repeat the question again?
What's your take on business analysts, BAs? BAs are typically being viewed as an indication of a waterfall sprint, or waterfalling within in agile close.
Yeah, no, I might be actually, I'm very clear on a BA role. It shouldn't be exist whatsoever. There's just a result of a Taylorism in the time and this division of labor, and that you need to specialize and etc. And also assumption that the developers are somehow have a different DNA, so they cannot possibly be able to understand the customer. That's just silly. And but just to be clear, do I therefore say that the skill required in a business analysis is unimportant? Absolutely not. In fact, actually, that should be developed more and more. The reality is still very much that most of the teams that we're dealing with are lacking this skill a lot for all kinds of reasons. So the skill of engaging with the customer and all the collaborative practices required for that, that's massively lacking also in less adoptions. And so we definitely need the skill. So so I make a very hard distinction between the role should be gone completely, but the people with these skills should be absolutely in the teams. They are very, very needed. And but they should be just simply in a team. They don't have a special role. They're just simply there for their skill.
Victor, just to, and I don't want to anchor you too much. I mean, obviously you served justice explaining this. Do you want to elaborate just a little bit on this from a standpoint of job security versus role security? Piggybacking off of what you said, do not confuse the set of skills with the role that's dedicated for that skill.
Yeah. So yeah, as you mentioned, one of the rules or no rules, but one of the principles of less adoption is that there is absolutely job security, but not role security. So which means that nobody gets fired, or this thinking is simply not in the less adoptions. Although I do encounter managers who think like that. So when we say definitely the role is gone, it doesn't mean the people are gone. Having said that, the reality, I'm not talking about the actual reality of less adoption, is there are many people equate their job with their role. And so there is a very strong connection between us. For some people can be so strong that they simply don't find it acceptable that the role is gone. And so, and this is, for example, due to the perception that the BA is somehow a more important status symbol than being a developer in many situations. And this especially in Asia and the case. I'm not sure about the US and Europe, not really seems, yeah.
Yeah, it definitely is viewed as such, as a white collar job.
Yeah. Yeah, so it cannot be shipped to India, they would say. Like, I don't know.
There are many jokes about that, right?
Yes. So that's yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Expand more. I have another question for you. Okay, let me give you one more. So it's kind of longish. I'm going to read. In the view of structural constraints and a financial institution, like I guess a fintech, investment bank, or a hedge fund, typically business decisions are made by different people. that makes identifying a product owner very difficult, even though we can execute in one product backlog. Beside having a suboptimal area backlog versus one product backlog, is there a way to overcome the challenge to pick the right PO?
So I've been involved for years in a corporate investment banking, and I recognize the problem, and very much that in corporate investment banking you have these all kinds of variations of basically a same product. Equity trading, fixed income, and so on and so on. Prime derivatives and all kinds of stuff. And so they while the teams executing this and the applications they are dealing with are quite often same. So there's a same middle layer, and especially the backend part, the reporting part, etc. So how do you then figure out who should be the product owner? How do you ensure that? Well, there is a relatively simple principle. You just need to go one level up, and you go just as often until you come to a single person. And that's actually how it works. So it sounds very simple. In reality is a bit more difficult, especially if you have a disturbed relationship between IT and a business, where the business is continuously complaining about IT. So the whole reason for less adoption is typically to actually fix that, and this disturbed relationship between business and IT. So if you go to business and you say, I need to go to the manager of the manager, and that's going to be the product owner, and it might be challenging. So especially when they are being thought that the product owner is an IT thing. And so unfortunately, way too many in a Scrum community and trainers and coaches, etc., they've been teaching literally in the companies that the product owner is something on a IT side, and typically relabeled to business analyst or something like that. And then it becomes much more difficult for me to fix that. But occasionally, I had this one company, and a bank, corporate investment bank, where they say we cannot have this manager as a product owner, this head of the whole trading unit, equity trading. And so because the mantra of this manager is, I do not have time for you, and that's basically the most common sentence that he would mention. And the culture a bit in the corporate investment banking is these very fast moving people who feel they are extremely important. They don't have time for anything, etc. And the funny thing happened. I asked, can you please just organize a session? We sit together with a bunch of managers and a few Scrum Masters and one team member, and we're going to invite this manager in the room, and I'm going to just simply, we're going to talk about it. And so he came into the room late, everybody was already there, and he says, please be quick, make it clear what you want. And so that's what this sentence. And it was a 10 minutes meeting where I basically explained this, who decides here how the money is spent on by the IT teams? And then he says, I do. Then you are the product owner. So because the essence of the product owner is to figure out how the money is spent. And it's a lots of money, right? Yes. And so everybody assumed that, everybody's busy with this question yet, but how much time does a product owner need to spend with the teams? Because he needs to spend every sprint dealing with the teams and stuff. No, nonsense. The product owner is somebody outward looking, and somebody who makes sure that there is a decision on priority, and there is a decision on how the product is actually positioned. This is the main job. The question is whether product owner wants to do this once half a year or more continuously. And so the answer is more continuously, because they are doing it anyway. But it's usually more accidental that they're doing it anyway. And so they're typically dealing with all kinds of people in between, and instead of directly with the team. For them, it doesn't really matter. They are basically the decision makers. What you don't want is bother this product owner with all kinds of detailed questions. Hence, my point about the teams engaging directly with the customer and with the users. So you want to bother product owner with the crucial questions. Where do we spend our money on? And so because the teams cost money. That's basically how they think. So it took me 10 minutes basically to solve the question. After that, he became a product owner and remained to be one.
Thank you for that. Hopefully that answers. Folks, I'm just gonna do a quick time check. It's T-5. So we got 5 minutes before we wrap. I got one very inflaming question to ask you, Viktor. I'm gonna put you on the spot, although I've been on the spot and with the same for the last few months, but I'm gonna save it until the last. Anyone else, folks? Anyone else would like to ask a question?
Hey, this is Ravi. It was really a powerful question that you asked for the product owner. Similarly, in the current organization who is relatively new to scaled way of operation, the project manager, the typical project manager who runs the IT side of the show, don't spend time with the team and don't want to listen to all the stories. So what kind of question we can ask to get the real attention from the project manager?
In less adoptions, basically every time we just don't spend time on that problem. The engagement is typically on a bit higher level, and where we say the project manager role is gone. So the project manager needs to decide what else he wants to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so we generally just don't avoid wasting time on that. So I would also generally advise, be careful with doing an agile introduction with where the project manager is the main person.
Mm. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Viktor.
Yeah.
Hey, Viktor. Yeah. Thanks for shining some light on the frozen metal problem here. Viktor, a quick question to you, and this is maybe for everyone's benefit, but kind of selfishly, and I'm honest about it. So I get this question a lot, right? I get it from my trainees, from my coaches, and just from people in my network. One of the big things about large-scale Scrum is physical collocation, right? There are other things that are very hard, hard rules and less. This is one of, I think it's the second rule on the list, and it's like a 2C or something, A, B, C, D, right? So this is the most quote-unquote expensive rule because collocating individuals and teams, it's an expensive business to run. Now, this is not the only rule, and personally, I don't feel this is the most important rule, but I get this question a lot. It applies to one team Scrum, but when, like you said, in large-scale Scrum settings, when you descale organization and scale up Scrum, all of these things get amplified and grow exponential as opposed to be all linear. What's your forecast? Think about COVID implications and post-COVID lifestyle on large-scale Scrum, in general organizational dynamics.
So one thing I wish I have one suggestion to kind of an attempt to break through the continuous discussion about the collocated, not collocated. It seems like also before the COVID, there was already an ongoing discussion about that and why can't people work remotely, etc. Is simply leave the question up to the team. And let the team decide themselves, developers in a team and team members themselves figure out themselves how they actually want to do, how they want to work. And so this is obviously something to do, assuming the team is already in a certain level of taking responsibility for these kind of questions. So there is a setup, organizational setup, where the team has clarity on what is exactly their responsibility, so that they don't implicitly, due to organizational setup, shift this responsibility away from them, and they just want to work remotely regardless of the consequence. Okay, so why do I say this? Why this is important? Because to a large extent, it depends a lot on the context of. So, for example, if the team members have been working before a lot face to face, it's generally easier for them to work remotely and from each other. So what I also notice is that combination seems to be not so harmful, which means that a few days they come together. A week, let's say 3 days a week, they sit together, and 2 days they're working from home. This proves to be also working it seems to be not harmful. And but in all these situations, the difference was actually who decided implicitly or explicitly for them to work remotely or not. If usually it's implicitly, simply because where the people are hired, etc., etc. And where you don't really have a choice to play with that, and so this is where things are then going wrong. And then what happens is that you basically have to work remotely for all kinds of reasons, or not collocated, and then you make up all kinds of reasons and have all kinds of practices to make it less harmful, which is great. But you have to keep in mind that you cannot reason at some point suddenly that it's equally effective to work remotely as collocated. That's simply not true. And there is actual research proven over and over and over again that remote work is not effective as collocated. And the question is more how much of a price do you pay? And but there is always a relatively high price that you pay. So that's what happens. Now we have this COVID situation. That's basically a reset button. Forget everything that I just said. We have the situation. We need to deal with that, and so the best as we can. So you have to work remotely. So you look for all kinds of practices, including me, like this Zoom to make it less painful. And yeah, but trust me, I would always prefer having this kind of a meetup face to face. So the level of interaction and everything is not so comfortable. Right now I feel less comfortable because of all kinds of lack of cues and not seeing people, etc. So for example, I see now a few of you on my screen, and I'm focusing my face onto that and not on the camera, simply because I'm so depending on cues from the facial expressions, and it's simply me as how I work, how I communicate.
Yeah, thanks. I think you did a great job answering this, and I always give it a very short and sweet. You know, it's not the same when you do remote dating. Full stop. Certain things you just can't do.
Yeah.
We can be politically correct and not say it, but we can be blunt and honest and say it. We are at the top of the hour, and I think I want to be cognizant of your time. I know some people here may have some extra time, but for you, it's the beginning of tomorrow, right? So I really want to let you go. I don't want to hold you up for too long. Folks, for those of you that are on the call, I pinged a link with where the video will be posted, as well as Viktor's deck. Viktor, you're going to ship it over to me right away, right? You can send me a PDF. No problem?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'll take it. And as soon as the recording is available in the cloud, I'll make it available on YouTube, and I'll post it in the channel. And hopefully you can pass it on to your colleagues, and stay tuned, stay healthy, stay safe, importantly, and try to do more with less and stay engaged with us. Okay?
Good.
Thank you for joining. Victor.
Thank you. And if you want to engage, feel free to ask questions, etc. I put this slide on so to have people engage in LeSS community too. So I guess it's obvious what it says.
I want to make sure I'll add to the page I pinged your direct contact, so people can reach out to you with questions, or I mean, I know you is very, very transparent, so it's easy to get a hold of you.
Good. Thank you.
Excellent.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining, everyone. Cheers. Hey, Mahbub, thank you very much for being here with me and helping this happen. Thanks to your Zoom channel. Hopefully, once I stop recording, we're gonna get this in the cloud. Okay. All the best. I know you're in the UK and you need to go to get some sleep. See you all.